Or happens frequently. Okay, so in case you aren't familiar with the EAMH and EAL Resource Network Facebook group, our aim is to create a safe and welcoming space for people from all backgrounds and walks of life to share, brainstorm, discuss, problem solve, and learn together in community. So Jane Faulkner of EATA, give a wave, Jane, and Callie Walsh, and I are your moderators, both for these conversations and also for our Facebook group. So a couple little tiny housekeeping items for today's call and all future calls. Just make sure you're muted during the entirety of the panel until the Q&A. Use the group chat over on the right-hand side to make comments, ask questions, and Jane will mention some pieces about that when she's talking. And Callie will be monitoring your questions during the discussion, and she'll lead a Q&A at the end. And she's also really great about collecting those questions and bringing them back to the Facebook group if we can find ones that would sort of be helpful for future conversation over on the actual Facebook group itself. So without any more talking, I will turn you over to Jane, who will introduce Linda and also guide us through a brief grounding and then get the conversation started. So welcome everybody. And
yes, welcome everyone. So we are so grateful you're here, Linda. Linda is an author, speaker, riding instructor and horse trainer who's become an internationally recognized innovator in the field of equine experiential learning and a respected writer on the subject of equine facilitated psychotherapy. Her book, The Tao of Equus, A Woman's Journey of Healing and Transformation.
Hang on, somebody needs to mute.
Yeah.
Allie. Yep, perfect, thanks.
Awesome. A Woman's Journey of Healing and Transformation Through the Way of the Horse was selected as one of the top 10 religion and spirituality books of 2001 by Amazon.com. Her second book, Riding Between the Worlds, Expanding Our Potential Through the Way of the Horse, was published in 2003. Linda founded AponaQuest in 1997 and has trained people that are carrying out her model all over the world. So thank you so much for being here, Linda. We're really, really grateful.
Well, it's a real honor to be invited. I appreciate it.
Before we start, we're just going to do a really simple grounding. So if you all would just take notice of the support underneath you. So whether it's you're sitting on the floor or the lounge or a chair, just notice the support that is giving you. Feel your sitting bones. You might feel the back of your body resting into the support. Feel your feet on the ground. That connection with Mother Earth. And how in this moment we're all connected through that connection to Mother Earth. It's underneath all of us. If it's comfortable for you, just notice your breathing. And just notice how it is for you inside you today. And rest into a place within you that feels the most settled or the most comfortable. And then I'm just going to invite you to gently open your eyes and orient or look around your space. Is there something in your space that's comforting to look at? And just notice how looking at that thing supports you in some way. Then I'm going to invite you to take a look at the faces that are also in this Zoom room, our community. people that have that common interest of loving horses and wanting to help people. And while you're looking at one another in the Zoom room, I'm going to invite you to remember that we are all human. We're all doing our best. Linda's giving up her time and energy today to support us and educate us. So please be really mindful of any questions or comments you make. We all deserve kindness and generous assumptions. And now I might start telling Linda what our questions are. So I'm going to read out the first two, and then Carly's going to read out the next few, and then Leaf's going to read out a few. So the first question for you, Linda, is can you describe for us how you conceptualize the different ways of offering EAL? Population served, goals addressed, and provider competencies. And the next question is, how do you distinguish EAL from EAMH, especially in practice? And what are some hands-on or practical examples of EAL versus EAMH that can help our members see and feel the differences? And how do you know if you are doing EAL versus EAMH? Carly, are you all right to do the next two?
I am. Our third question is, if a session does start to turn into an EAMH session, what are some ways to redirect the session back to EAL? And our fourth question is, do you feel that the horse's role is different in an EAL session as opposed to an EAMH session?
And then the final ones, and Linda, we'll Jane will start asking the first one, and then you can kind of go from that, and then we'll kind of move you through these two, or you can speak to them any way you like. There's no real right way to do this. So the last two that we have here, number 5 and 6, are discuss how providers of EAMH and EAL can work together and support each other's unique services, and what qualifications do you believe people need to have to provide EAL?
Okay, so let's start with the first question. And I really would like to hear the question each time so that I can get really specific about answering that question.
Yeah, great. So the first question, can you describe for us how you conceptualize the different ways of offering EAL? Population served, goals addressed, and provider competencies.
Well, my preferred term is actually one that I came up with for Leaf's book many years ago, or shared with her for the first time in that book, Equine Facilitated Human Development. And I think equine assisted learning is a good one for sure. And that seems to be the one used most often. So I'm happy to go with that. And I think that it's important to realize that when we're really talking about equine assisted learning, that we're talking about people who are functioning at a reasonably high level who want to really excel in life. And so we're looking at teaching people emotional and social intelligence skills that are going to not only help them with their personal relationships, but with their professional relationships, and also in the field of training people for leadership in various capacities. And I have a rather broad view of leadership. I mean, for me, parenting is a leadership role, teaching is a leadership role. There, of course, are management, official management, corporate leadership roles. And then there's also what happens to you at it. I consider leadership also to be an advanced form of personal development, so that when you access your true calling, your true gifts that want to be shared in the world, and when you access a real vision for how you want to move forward, the sad truth of the matter is, for those of us who don't necessarily think of ourselves as leaders, is that at that point you are a leader. You are going to have to bring in others. You're going to have to help them understand the vision and move forward in a coordinated way. You're going to have to deal with the interpersonal issues between the people that you've hired to help you with your vision, because there's going to be a lot of them. And you're also going to have to be able to handle a lot of projection onto you as a leader. So there's a certain level of courage and emotional heroism anytime you step into that kind of leadership role. And so this is at the level, truly, a lot of times of what I call emotional heroism. Because there are going to be people who are wanting your job, who are filled with envy and jealousy, who are trying to be competitive with you, trying to get you to get rid of people on staff that they don't get along with. You're going to have to deal with people who are also wanting to use your vision to jumpstart their own vision. So they're going to try to influence you to take your vision in a different direction. So there's a huge amount of emotional heroism and a lot of strength of conviction that you need to go there. And when you're working with horses, you can really exercise those abilities. And so I do find that working with horses to learn advanced human development skills is a significant way to go, partly because in the 1990s, psychologists determined that only about 10% of human communication is verbal. That leaves 90% of the messages we're sending back and forth to each other in that nonverbal range. And yet in our culture, and just being on Zoom, for instance, or writing an email or writing a book, you're only dealing with a small portion of the communication potential. There's that whole other 90%. And where do you go to learn those nonverbal skills? It's very hard to be able to do that by reading a book, or also, I mean, just, a lot of times people will do things like, acting out scenarios and things like that. When you talk about certain kinds of experiential learning where people are kind of acting out scenarios with each other. But there's a certain level of that that's not paying attention to the nonverbal aspects. And I know, for instance, that when I see a person go into a pen with a horse and they're thinking that they're telling the horse and being assertive with the horse while their body is shrinking and they're holding submissive behavior, and even just setting a boundary with the horse, they're actually backing up while they're waving a whip, flailing it about in an ineffective way. So, simple things like that can really help people. It doesn't have to be at the level of training abused horses to be able to develop that level of skill. A lot of times these simple skills of setting boundaries, and then of learning how to be assertive without being aggressive, and learning how to commit to a goal while also allowing flexibility and being able to find out what that particular horse needs to fulfill the goal that you're asking. You need flexibility, but you also need conviction and focus on the final goal. And working with horses over time to learn these skills, especially if you start with the simple skills and build each skill on top of the other, rather than just throwing somebody in with a loose horse or a group of loose horses for the first time they've ever met a horse. I mean, that's what a lot of people were doing in the early days. And, that's, to me, that's like, this is the thing about experiential learning. Like, some people will say, well, we just need to like have the person go in and just discover and learn from this for themselves, So in the beginning, people weren't even teaching people how to put a halter on a horse. They would just throw them into a group of horses. And all of this is done in the name of leadership training or personal development or empowerment or something. But from my perspective, it's helpful to be methodical and give people pieces that each step of the way you can build on these pieces. That's like telling somebody, we're going to start a new project and we're going to market to people in Japan. And we're just going to go into Japan and we're just going to, like, in the middle of everything, just kind of figure out and, how to work on this, rather than say, hey, let me hire somebody who knows Japanese customs, who knows what Japanese people care about, who understands their culture. The same thing with horses, letting people have some knowledge about the culture of horses, the needs of horses, the perspectives of horses. And the other thing, like, for instance, when we would have somebody go in and learn how to be assertive with a horse, maybe by free lunging a horse. That's a pretty standard way to do it. but not giving people any idea of how to do that. It just seems crazy. That's like saying, you know, we should learn brain surgery experientially. You know, this is not how people learn. They learn by building upon knowledge, and they learn to build skills progressively. Otherwise, you just end up in a situation where a lot of times people would come out and they're filled with confusion and shame for how things didn't work out effectively. You know, and I'm telling you, if you threw me into an operating room and asked me to do brain surgery on somebody with no previous training, I'm sure that the person would end up dead, and I would feel very shamed and humiliated. So it's really not fair to the horses or the people to think of equine facilitated or assisted learning as something that's experiential, in the sense that people are going to just naturally learn this along the way. So that, you know, having very specific skills that you're teaching that build on top of each other, that is the perspective of, from my perspective, of how I engage equine facilitated learning. And there's a certain level of functionality in personal relationships and professional relationships that people need to go straight into the experiential learning element. Whereas when you're dealing with equine facilitated psychotherapy, particularly involving people who've experienced severe trauma or who have, you know, mental health challenges of various kinds, you have to slow things way down. And there's a lot of support that needs to go into that. So when I work with equine facilitated learning, and I know I'm kind of skipping ahead to some of these questions, but it's just kind of happening naturally. For instance, when I do equine facilitated psychotherapy, I always have a mental health professional with me who is experienced with the mental health challenges we're addressing. And so in terms of working with people who've suffered significant trauma, I want an expert with me who understands trauma, who understands also how to assist somebody. And I really don't want somebody newly graduated from college in this. What I want is somebody who's been working in this field for a while, and hopefully also has an appreciation for and an interest in the equine facilitated part. And so a lot of times these days, well, since 2013, I've been working with Dr. Rebecca Bailey, and we created a modality called connection focused therapy. And what we've really spent a lot of time understanding what are the special needs of trauma survivors, for instance. Or she works with people in high conflict divorce and family systems that are really treacherous to negotiate. So she has a lot of experience in that area, and we would look at what activities and principles and tools that I have in the experiential learning side of things. And then, are these relevant? Do we need to create new activities or tools? And what we learned to do was we learned to slow things way down. So we have completely different standards for how we move through an equine facilitated psychotherapy session as opposed to an equine facilitated leadership training, for instance. One thing I've noticed over the years, and I've seen references to this in books from executive coaches, for instance. Bob Wall's book, Coaching for Emotional Intelligence, brings this up also, is that when you're a counselor and you move into, let's say, leadership training, you can do serious damage to somebody's reputation by engaging in a therapeutic stance with people who were there to learn leadership training. And he wasn't even in equine facilitated activities at that time. He was talking about, you know, the kinds of things where people say, oh yeah, we're going to learn some emotional intelligence for leadership training. And then a counselor would come in and have them all wash each other's feet and talk about a deep personal story, because you're supposed to be able to feel vulnerable with your team members, because Patrick Lencioni said that. And it's like, no, you can totally destroy somebody's reputation by going to that deep place in an environment that's actually can be highly competitive and even highly predatory, where people are really there to use others' vulnerabilities against them for personal gain. And it's highly competitive. So if you don't create a situation where people have a different standard for what they confess, what personal things they share, for what embarrassing positions they're put in the name of bringing awareness to somebody, a group's dysfunctions or something like that, it can be extremely damaging. So I think it's really important, if you are a therapist, a mental health professional, that you're very conscious of when you're doing equine facilitated mental health. And then if you want to move into equine facilitated learning or equine assisted leadership training or something like that, that you also realize that you cannot have the same activities and the same approach as you have for therapeutic sessions that you would have for a leadership session. Some of the complaints over the years where I've received where I've actually had to go before our own ethics committee with people because of complaints from people who've come to workshops in, instructors that we have. The most often we have a complaint is when a counselor, a therapist will create a workshop for a bunch of people with an experiential learning theme and then take them into a therapeutic place. And so people signed up for something that they expected to be more professional development or advanced personal development or creativity or something like that. And then they find that they're being forced to sit in a circle and talk about really private things off the bat, or they're not a team player. So there can be damage done in both directions. If you have, I often see also people who are educators and, really fine horse trainers who have been for years. I mean, if any of you have been horse trainers or riding instructors, you know that to get somebody ready for a show or get somebody to perform or create a relationship with their horse, a lot of their emotional stuff is going to come up. And so a lot of times therapists find themselves in a position where they have to deal with emotional material and maybe trauma of falling off a horse, and then some people getting on horses who have been sexually abused as children and then going into a freeze mode because of the movement of the horse starts to engage, beneath the pelvic area, and they can go into a tremendous freeze mode. So on some level, horse trainers could use some of these emotional and social intelligence skills, but they also have to learn how to keep them within the realm of what they're dealing with and not go into a counseling place with people. That's very damaging too. I mean, so even outside of our fields, just in the realm of horse training and riding, you'll often find people acting as therapists at the barn for each other. And this is completely unproductive. So it's nice for us to reach out further from our field of equine facilitated or assisted activities, whether it's therapeutic or learning, to reach out more also to the horse world and say, here are some pieces that you can use to help a frightened client, to help a client with PTSD from falling, versus helping a client where you realize all of a sudden she's riding and she's a beginner rider, and now she's going into freeze mode because her pelvis is waking up, and now all of this rush of memories and feelings she can't even describe are coming up. Like, how do you contain that? Make sure that you have some therapists or equine facilitated learning specialists and therapists on your list to refer to. And these are the skills you can teach people, and this is as far as you take it, and then you refer this person to a professional. And that is really, really the way I see it. It is very important to separate equine assisted learning from equine assisted mental health on both sides. Mental health professionals need to know when you're stepping out of the therapeutic setting and going into a place where a therapeutic mentality could be damaging to people, and vice versa. When you are doing equine assisted learning, you need to understand when somebody's going into a deep personal issue or some kind of trauma response, and you need to know and be trained well enough to how to contain that, and then also immediately have a list of people to refer this person to, and what to do to contain it, and then also to shift the activities maybe that you're even planning to do. So when I do, whether it's therapeutic with someone like Rebecca Bailey, or whether it's equine assisted learning or leadership training, I don't give people the schedule of what we're going to cover. A lot of people want the schedule. What are we going to do today? And what are we going to do tomorrow? I may start by telling them, yes, we're going to start here and we're going to see where the horses take us. We're going to see what's coming up for people. And we're going to start to design the workshop according to the needs and gifts of the people who have showed up that day. And the way I often put it is that, and this is why I think of it often as equine facilitated learning as opposed to equine assisted learning, is I'm not the one always setting the agenda. The horses are co-facilitators. They're going to show me stuff I would have never known about this person except in that setting. And sometimes the horses will show us a person's gifts that we didn't begin to understand, so that you can see that this group of people is ready for more advanced techniques. So you're going to throw out part of the schedule and then go straight to more advanced techniques because this group is ready for it. And you can also feel like, yeah, this is the standard way we do it, and these skills build on each other. But you can see maybe 1 or 2 people in the group have serious trauma issues. So now you're going to slow the whole thing down, and you may split the group into 2, and then you may have a sequence of different activities that are going on. So it's always really about being flexible and watching what the horses are showing you, and then having tools that you can bring in, almost like you have a toolbox, rather than a set schedule of a progression of skills, which, is important to have. But a lot of times, like I say, you have people that are ready for more advanced stuff, and you have other people who can't even begin to cover the first aspects of the first day of your schedule. So having that kind of flexibility is important. Is there some other aspect of that question that I should answer?
Oh, maybe, I mean, I feel like you sort of spoke to that, but just the sort of the different ways of offering EAL, like the equine facilitated human development. Are there any other ways that you're seeing people offer EAL that you'd want to sort of share with the audience, like beyond that sort of model of more leadership and personal?
Oh, yeah. And I mean, I do that as well. I mean, a lot of my most popular workshops have to do with expanding intuition and creativity, and expanded states of consciousness and awareness. And so horses jumpstart those expanded states of awareness all the time. I know some of you have probably experienced that. And there's ways to methodically exercise those expanded states. And these are drugless expanded states, but they can take people to places that they would normally associate with maybe some kind of psychedelic plant medicines. And that's becoming popular now, and even being accepted now in therapeutic settings. And they're finding that being able to transcend and expand your consciousness gives you new perspectives that you wouldn't have in just moving through things methodically and logically. And so I have workshops that do exercise that, but I also, like we would maybe call it shamanic states of consciousness, that exercise it methodically and make sure I'm seeing a person go through a variety of activities to make sure they can handle the expanded states that may come up, and see if they're stuck, or see if they're going too far ahead and they're getting too ungrounded, and that sort of thing. So, a lot of the things that people might call, some of the more psychedelic therapies that are now really becoming quite popular, horses can actually jumpstart those states in a more gentle way. So that if you take one of those drugs, it's like you're on a train until it reaches the end of the line. There's no getting off a train like that. And that's not an area of interest of mine, is to explore using those plant medicines therapeutically. I'm not against it, and I appreciate people who are interested in that. But I know that I can help people access those states with no drugs and be able to control those states. And we teach people how to control those states and only take in as much as they're ready for at any given moment, and any kind of journeying type things that we do. I've had people access early on, and this would be shocking to me. This is why I realized I needed to learn how to handle this is I've had people go in with horses early on in like simple private sessions and then access past life memories. And I don't even know if I actually truly believe in that or not. I'm open to the idea. I'm not considering it a part of my own belief system. I have a kind of healthy skepticism about any of these states. But I realize that if that's going to happen, I have to know what to do with it in a constructive way. Otherwise, to be a facilitator and have a state like that being jump-started by a horse and then have the facilitator go into a freak out over that, that's extremely dangerous. So, you know, I think anybody working in this field with horses would do well to also do some additional training, perhaps in some archetypal psychotherapy or some shamanic work of some kind. Because not necessarily even because that's an interest of yours, but to know what to do with a person who jumpstarts a state like that in a session that you didn't intend to go there. So, but the fact that the horses can do this, and horses jumpstart states of creativity and inspiration all the time. So we have workshops that are specifically about that, expanding creativity, expanding intuition, expanding states of consciousness, doing some journeying work. The good thing is that if you're doing this well and you understand the process of how to help people build up skills methodically, if you do this well, you help people develop these skills that they can call upon in ways in which they are personally able to titrate the situation. You teach people how to only go as far as they can remain reasonably present, and how to stop the process and what to do next. People who are highly creative and intuitive, they're accessing these states all the time, you know, just driving down the road. That's not a very safe thing to do. So you need to also teach people when to go into these, what you might even call creative dissociative states, how to keep yourself safe when you go into a state like that, and then how to get grounded and functional and present in this world when you're doing other things in life. So yeah, so I would say creativity, personal development, social intelligence, emotional intelligence, leadership development, and then also expanded states of consciousness. These are all areas in the equine facilitated learning place. You don't want to take somebody who's a serious trauma survivor into any kind of state involving shamanic consciousness unless it's under the real direction of a therapist who's experienced in that area and also knows and has done preparation work with that person to determine that person may be ready for that. So if I see a workshop where somebody comes in and that's starting to happen, I'm going to contain it. And by also not giving them the schedule and not even letting them know that we may have wanted to do like a 30-minute journey. One of the first things we do, a simple journey we do, is a drumming journey where people visualize becoming a horse and having an experience as a horse and then sharing that afterwards. That's a classic, simple shamanic type journey. And I normally would do that on the second day of a 4-day workshop called Black Horse Wisdom, where we're exercising those states. But if I see somebody on the first day slipping into those states and getting highly dysregulated, I'm not going to do that journey on the second day. I'm going to do some other things to ground people. And I'm not going to let anybody even know that that was a possibility. So nobody feels like, you know, we're losing out because of this one person who's having a hard time, you know. And we have, luckily, lots of creativity and inspirational boosting activities with the horses and then away from the horses, involving expressive arts and music making and things like that, where I can pull those things in, even if I realize I'm not going to do even the simplest shamanic journey. And then if somebody is extremely dysregulated, and this doesn't happen very often, but it happened once or twice over 25 years of doing this work, where a person is so dysregulated and so focused on themselves that they can't even stand to hear anybody else in the group share with each other. They need, you know, and they get really aggressive with others and they don't want to hear what anybody else has to say and they have to speak all the time. When I see that, I might see how far we can get with a series of activities on the first day. And then I might take them aside and say, you know what you really need right now is, and I can see because you're not really interested in the group right now. the group isn't offering you anything right now. So I would like to refund your money, and I would like to recommend that you see my colleague who's going to be able to do a professional intensive for you. And so I get them out of there. And it's not all about making money. It's about, wow, this is clearly not the right workshop for you. You need someone to really be there for you right now. You need full support from the staff and the horses. And I want you to invest in that. And here's the person I think you're going to be able to do that with. And then I've seen even those people come back later to a group workshop and then be really functioning at a much higher level. So sometimes you actually may have to take someone out, and you really have to be ready at any moment to do that.
I think a great point, Linda. I think that's such an important point to, how we, all the nuances of managing these types of groups and the different things that will arise, simply by the act of coming into that space and being with the horses. And that as facilitators, it's so critical that we are prepared to know how to do that, because it's probably going to happen no matter what container we set, no matter how well we do assessment, no matter any of those things. So thank you for speaking into that. I think we thought we'd go up to about 10 more minutes, or just a little under 10 minutes. And then we'll start our Q&A. So Jane, which question are you thinking to roll with? Or Linda, do you have one that you want to speak into in this last remaining time?
Well, I think that when you brought up the word assessment, that's really important. It is good to, have questionnaires, and also the theme of the workshop you're creating, as specific as you can make it. So when I do a workshop about, exercising more of the shamanic states of consciousness and creativity and expanded states of awareness, I don't call that workshop Spirit of the Transcendent White Unicorn. I call it Black Horse Wisdom, because what I want is somebody who's attracted to these more, these deeper states of consciousness and moving into the collective unconscious. And so if I had someone coming to Spirit of the Transcendent White Unicorn, and I'm thinking that they're not going to necessarily, I'm going to attract some people who are looking to engage in what John Wellwood calls, oh God, what does he call it? Such a great term. It's a way of, spiritual bypassing. Yeah. So with a workshop like that, you're going to get people who want to move to a transcendent spiritual experience, and they have a lot of material underground or unconsciously or even consciously, and they just want to get rid of that and transcend, and so just the kind of title of the workshop, but also the assessments, even for somebody coming into, let's say, one of the instructor training programs I offer, they actually do an extended question and answer application. But I also know that a lot of times they are only going to tell you what they think you want to hear. So you always have to be ready when you read somebody's assessment or whatever. The horses are going to show you things that maybe they didn't even know was going on inside of them. Not even that they're necessarily trying to hide it. People are just wanting to tell you what you want to hear. And a lot of really intelligent people have bypassed a lot of the darker interpersonal issues or trauma issues by being able to figure out what a particular degree program requires, and they're smart enough to give it to them while they're bypassing all the material that's still there that needs to be worked with. So yeah, that was what I wanted to say about that. But which other question would you like me to address?
I think Jane has an idea.
Yeah, I would love you to address the horse's role and how it's different, Linda, between equine facilitated learning and equine assisted mental health, if that's okay.
Oh yeah, I love that. I've had stronger and stronger opinions about that over the years. There's, in the beginning, there was just this feeling that any horse could do this work, but it's not true. Partly when you start to bring in the terminology associated with the polyvagal theory by Stephen Porges, it kind of illuminates this. And Dr. Rebecca Bailey was really great in bringing up the polyvagal theory and us creating a sequence of activities that's polyvagal informed. She works directly with Stephen Porges on occasion. But in terms of dysregulation, self-regulation, and co-regulation, those three terms really help you to understand how to bring in horses as well. So dysregulation means your nervous system obviously gets dysregulated. I think everybody in this group probably understands this. The person goes in perhaps into a flight, fight, or freeze mode. Their nervous system gets overactivated, and it can be over very, very simple things. Trauma survivors tend to get dysregulated really easily over things that wouldn't bother anyone else. The same with certain horses. So if you have a horse that gets dysregulated easily, and this can be young horses too. This is why you don't want horses under the age of, 4 or 5 doing this work, unless those horses are working with advanced students who already understand, first of all, their own self-regulation skills, and then they're learning how to co-regulate another being. In other words, using your nervous system to help another being become regulated and stabilized. So if I have advanced students that are learning how to do this, yes, I might have them work with a younger horse, or I might have them work with one of my more challenging horses, or a horse who has a past associated with abuse. But those are advanced students. For trauma-related people who are easily dysregulated, for any number of reasons, actually, you need horses who are already highly self-regulated and have the capacity to co-regulate a dysregulated human. And so you don't want a young horse. You don't want a horse that has suffered trauma recently and is still in their own recovery process from that. And you don't want highly dominant, naturally aggressive, or naturally dominant horses to work with anybody in an equine facilitated mental health situation. Because in that situation, what you are generally dealing with are people who are easily dysregulated. So I choose horses, and I generally, on the first day of any workshop I do, I have people interact with my horses that can help regulate a dysregulated human. And I have staff members around doing the same thing, helping to regulate a dysregulated human, so that the horse isn't carrying all of that themselves. But I have to have horses who can do that, who have that capacity. Those are the first ones people work with. And then in more advanced workshops, now you're going to work with horses who maybe are a little younger and need someone who can help them regulate. Or more, I have people in more advanced workshops here work with my more dominant horses. Those horses, if you are dysregulated in their presence, they're going to use it against you and start pushing you around the arena. So you have to know how to self-regulate, and then you have to know how to co-regulate a horse out of a more dominant or aggressive state. And this is something that really, really fine horse trainers learn to do. But you get these really, really fine horse trainers who are thinking, yeah, I'm going to do equine facilitated leadership training, but they don't understand what it is their own nervous system has been trained to do by these extreme horses over the years. And so they just keep throwing people in with these extreme horses in the name of teaching them, human development skills or leadership skills or something. So I think it's always important to keep that in mind. I want horses who can self-regulate and who can co-regulate a dysregulated human to work with anyone, especially in the early stages of equine facilitated mental health. And then as those people or anyone else gets the skills in place to self-regulate and then to eventually learn how to co-regulate others, then we bring in progressively more challenging horses, almost like weight training, progressively weight training to help someone who's more challenging to become regulated and focused and working cooperatively with others. Does that answer the question?
Wonderful. Yes. Good. Okay. Well, what do you think, ladies? Shall we turn it over to Q&A?
Yeah. Yep. Thank you so much, Linda. That was so much amazing information for us all. I'm really grateful.
Thank you. I love talking with you guys because you're all in this field together, and we could all share stories for hours, I'm sure. And you all have your own great methods and tools and procedures. So it's really fun to talk with you all.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Linda. So Callie, shall we see what the audience is thinking? If anyone wants to be brave and ask Linda a question?
Yeah, Tara, you just put a question out there. Do you want to ask it to Linda?
Morning, I would love to. It's Tara. I'm over in Australia at the moment. My question was, is there a distinction that you see, Linda, in the role of the horse between a counselling session and a psychotherapy session? Because we tend to put it all in mental health, but you know, that's quite a different sort of skill there. So I heard you just explain a difference. Well, you talk specifically about mental health, but there's difference in the role of the horse between EAL and mental health. But then in mental health, is there some differences in terms of their role?
Well, I really don't. My orientation is, I don't appreciate, this is my own bias. I really don't appreciate people using the horses as a projection or transference screen. And so, yes, of course, when you're interacting with horses or people, your own projections and transference will come up, and then you just work with that as it comes up. But to use the horse as a metaphor for human relationships, I have a little bit of problem with that. And so I feel like having people interact with this horse now is teaching them, and then encountering perhaps their own projection or their own transference. In other words, this horse reminds me of my father or my stepfather or whatever. If it'll come up naturally, if that comes up naturally, then you work with it. Like for instance, I had a person, and this was an EAL session really, but this stuff comes up anyway, is that she was encountering this one horse named Max, and she said, yeah, I don't like that horse. And I'm like, oh, tell me more. He just reminds me of my father. What a bastard, And so, and this is how I was also keeping it out of a therapeutic range as well. Rather than taking her outside the pen or talking with her in the pen to tell me now about your relationship with your father in depth and all of this kind of stuff and what reminds you about your father with this horse. Instead, I was like, okay, well, let's have a few activities where you interact with Max and let's see if he really is like your father. So that she actually realized that for some reason, she thought Max was going to push her all over the arena and be really brutish and all of this stuff. And of course, now I'm hearing her past that was really distressing for her coming up. But then I would draw her back to the present and say, well, when you set a boundary with Max, Max listens to you, And then so over time, she was learning to set boundaries with the horse and seeing a horse that would respect the boundaries. And then the payoff too was to realize that not everybody in her life who reminds her of her father is going to be acting like her father. We engage in projection and transference with other people all day long, And if you want to work on that in an office setting or outside the round pen in an equine facilitated counseling or mental health scenario, it's coming up naturally. You're not trying to drum this stuff up by working with horses. That's kind of my orientation, but it's also how I might keep it out of a counseling session. And I guess what I'm interested in is finding out to you, what is the difference to you between a counseling session and a mental health session? Tara.
Yes, I'm an EAL facilitator.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and just fascinated by all the different types of equine assisted interactions that we have, and looking at different qualifications. And it was raised by Lynn sort of earlier that EAL is often considered to be lower in terms of capacity and capability and respectfulness rather than EAMH. And in Australia, we have qualifications, and Jane has our premier qualification for counselling. But there isn't a qualification for EAL. And so when someone like me comes to look at, well, you know, do I get a qualification? Do you go for counselling or do you go for psychotherapy? But then I'm just really interested to see what is the difference between those two look like in a session.
No, I guess I don't know, because
yeah.
I don't have, like when I do connection focused therapy, that modality and those trainings and those sessions with Dr. Rebecca Bailey, she never makes that distinction between counseling and mental health. She's looking more at, you know, helping somebody train their nervous system to become more self-regulated. And she's looking at stuff that comes up that may be intense grief related, how to, you know, be held and supported during those more extreme emotional states so that people can move through them. And she will do work in a counseling office or a therapeutic office to, you know, spend time with stuff related to the past, and not necessarily bring that up in an activity with a horse, because you don't want somebody to get too dysregulated with a horse, you know. So I guess I'm not the best person to ask what's the difference between counseling and mental health. I put it all in the same thing myself too. And I meet a lot of people who are licensed therapists, for instance, who have let their license go so that they could do more of the equine assisted learning activities because they like the skill building function of that. And they feel that a lot of times that their license requires them to do things or not do things in that field that become a hindrance to them. And I don't understand this well enough, so I think it might be fun for you guys to get Dr. Rebecca Bailey to be a part of this discussion, because I think she would have more of an expertise in that area than I do. She clearly would. But yeah, does anybody else? I mean, you said, Jane, you're the one with the qualification. Jane, what is the difference that you see between counseling and mental health therapy?
Yeah, so I guess for me, it's because you've got counselling and then psychotherapy. In Australia, our terms are a little different to your terms in the US. But Tara, for us here, I would see counselling as more where you are sitting with and supporting somebody to kind of deepen into what's happening for them in the moment. And I would see psychotherapy as where you are supporting someone to go back into their past and their early childhood. But it can really depend on how the counselling is taught and how the psychotherapy is taught. But kind of traditionally, that's the difference that's seen in textbooks, if that helps. Yeah.
So Jane, you wouldn't see much of a difference in the role of the horse under those two scenarios, or you would?
I guess as a psychotherapist, like Linda was saying before, I really look to the horse because I find they do give me lots of insights into a person's history, their story. Whereas counselling, maybe the horse is more there co-regulating and being with, and I find this very tricky to answer because it really depends on the training and on the model of counselling or psychotherapy you're using. So for me as a Gestalt psychotherapist, I think I bring that a lot into the counselling qualification that I teach. So it is very relational and we are really interested in the whole person. But anyway,
okay.
We can chat later, Tara.
Yeah, I don't want to railroad this conversation because it's about what Linda's bringing to us. So
it's a very interesting question though, Tara. I'm really glad you asked it. And I think it would be a fun thing to have a a discussion about that very thing. I mean, I would like to hear the difference. I would like to hear people's opinions on that.
Well, and one thought I was just having is this idea about sort of how the horse, one thing you said, Linda, earlier that was really, really powerfully important, I think, was this idea about slowing down in and that sort of depth work. Like if, you know, sort of if we're looking at psychotherapy and that idea of going deeper and deeper and deeper into these places that are very old and very, very hidden and very unconscious and you know, have a lot of sort of excavation that needs to be happening from the past, right? Like that idea of what is it like to be in the presence of the horse in that very slowed down place that allows for the upwelling of some of that unconscious memory and feeling and emotion, you know, whereas perhaps in this notion of sort of either counseling in the Australian sort of way of it, or even the EAL sort of, it's like things can maybe move along a little bit more quickly, or might even want to move along a little more quickly in order to not get bogged down in those deep, sticky places where things will arise, right? So that was kind of coming up for me, was maybe a distinction of like how much we move things along versus how much we slow things down, and when we do either one. So I don't know, back to you on that one, Linda, thoughts about that?
Yeah,
and there's not to interrupt too. I'm so sorry, Linda, but to kind of piggyback off of that, Leaf, too, I've been thinking a lot as you were speaking, Linda, about especially when you're in these groups with people who are more advanced and who are looking for that kind of consciousness expansion, like where does that line get? Because there is going to be some kind of dysregulation, like that consciousness expansion. I don't want to call it dysregulation, but it's not regulation in the way that we normally think about it. So where, like, can you speak a tiny bit? I know we're out of time, but like, can you speak a tiny bit to where, you know, like, oh, this is the line for me of where this dysregulation or subregulation or lack of regulation is too much for this person, too much for me, too much for my horses?
Well, first of all, if a person's going to go into a more expanded state of consciousness, we have them out. We don't have them in with the horses when they do that. So they have horse activities that really encourage a state of connection with a very safe being. I mean, horses not being predators, that's huge, you know, and maybe doing some grooming, which we know now from research, will help regulate the person, increase their heart rate variability. Oxytocin buffers the flight or fight response in favor of a calm and connect response. So we're going to have that happening. We're going to have a feeling of safety. We're going to have some horse activities related to connection and setting boundaries and understanding, you know, how you know, some horses like to be petted and then some horses don't want to be petted. How do you connect when it's not always about physical touch, simple things like that? How to set a boundary with a horse that's pushing you. And so when people know that, then we also start to do journeying experiences indoors. We use evocative music for that usually. And so we do very short experiences of moving into these more expanded states, where we also make it clear about how a person sets boundaries with the experience, with the idea, remember how you just set a boundary with that 1,000-pound horse? You can set a boundary with these experiences. We can titrate this. We can work on one little piece at a time. It's never a good idea for anyone, for any reason, to open the floodgates and just let all kinds of unconscious material come pouring out, whether it's you know, somebody who hasn't experienced trauma or who has, you know, it's never a good idea. So we are always teaching people how to titrate the experience. And so the asking a person to go toward an expanded state of awareness that might bring up evocative symbolic material or visionary material, that should be done outside of the round pen at the very least. Sometimes we might do drumming outdoors with the horses, with people in a round pen, with the horses circulating around them. so that they have the horse presence, but they are separate from the horses, because these states can go from mildly dissociative. And I mean, I did a project with a really fine writer and psychologist, an early writer on animal assisted therapy from years ago. I'm trying to remember his name right now, but he got really interested in this, and he said that he was interested in two forms of dissociation. One is survival oriented dissociation, which is kind of the gift from nature. If you're in an overwhelmingly threatening situation, you dissociate from the experience, and there's many advantages to that. But if every time you feel stress, you dissociate, that's why you go to therapy, so that you learn how to titrate that and keep from tripping off into those dysregulated states. But creative states are also dissociative. Artists will go into highly creative dissociative states where they don't even know that it's been 6 hours, and they've been working on something, and now they're starving and they have to go to the bathroom, and it has to happen now. And that's how they get pulled out of the state. That's a dissociative state. And so recognizing that expanded states of awareness are dissociative states. You don't put somebody who's in a dissociative state in with a horse. You can have them outside you can have a situation where the person is outside of a round pen, let's say, or a corral, and they're working on some stuff, and some stuff is coming up, and the horse is across the pen and is actually functioning. But the horse can walk away from that, or if the horse gets dysregulated and starts a race around, nobody has to defend the person. All you have to do is contain the situation and calm the horse down. So it is important to remember that I think that anytime somebody's going into a dissociative state, whether for survival or creative reasons, that you get the person out of the pen, and then maybe you sit right outside the pen and continue to work on whatever's coming up. So does that help at all?
I also think, just really quick, and I know we have to wrap up, but man, Linda, I just feel like this has so many arms and legs back to the application in counseling or psychotherapy, right? Or the mental health side of things, around how often, our participants can become disassociated or can slip into those states really quickly, and how important it is to have that awareness that being with the horses in that state is not probably very safe or very ethical or very good for anybody. And so I think that's an important nuance, is like, how do we get out, right? Like, how do we get back way away from the horses and do that work somewhere else until the person re-regulates or is able to re-regulate and then re-engage, as opposed to sort of using the horses as that regulation tool to get the people back into that regulated state. So I just really like, that is like very close to my heart. So thank you for speaking about that.
Yeah, and it can be as simple as sitting outside the horse's corral and continuing. You can just say, well, like the lady who went into this past life memory. I mean, it was wild. And I just said, okay, well, let's step out here and continue to work with what's coming up. And she was standing outside, right outside the corral that she'd been in before. And then she's able to go a little deeper, and then we're able to help her regulate. She takes a break, and then she goes back in with the horse to do another activity that sort of grew out of one of the themes that she brought up in that experience. So whereas other people might think, oh, have this person put their hands on the horse and breathe with the horse. I mean, that's not doing your horse any favors. That horse shouldn't have to be in that position. I mean, that horse can actually help to regulate the person just by standing right outside too, in the presence of the horse, and looking up at the horse and smelling the horse. So that can help bring somebody back.
Beautiful. Well, we could talk all day, I know, but we're over. So Jane, Callie, anything else? Linda, how do you guys want to wrap up?
I'm just really grateful. You've shared so much amazing information, Linda. Thank you. And that piece around association, like Leaf said, it's very close to my heart. It's so important that we're able to recognize it, both for the horses and for the clients. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll third that. Just the utmost gratitude, Linda, for your time and for these pieces of information that you shared, and the depth that you've brought to it has been really beautiful, and personally, like, really has given me just so much to contemplate and think about. So filled with gratitude.
Yes, thank you guys. I really appreciated it. And I know that was a great question you asked, Tara. It really makes me feel like it would be great to have, a session with this group on maybe the difference between counseling and other forms of therapy. I'm interested in that subject myself, and I'm certainly not an expert in that area. So I would love to hear from a couple of people who are experts.
That's super helpful, especially because we're thinking about what we're doing next. So it's
Right.
it's a good timing. So for everybody else, feel free. We just ask you guys to start dropping off, and thank you all so much for being here with us. And it's so fun to start seeing returning faces. It's really starting to feel like a community. So that's been a real treat. And to see new faces coming in is also a real treat. So thank you so much for everybody, and Callie and Jane, if we want to stay on for just a minute and debrief, we can do that. And then everybody else, we will be announcing our next series of discussions here in the next little bit. So we'll have a little hiatus, a couple weeks, but then we'll be back at it. So with new ideas, and let us know if there's anything you guys want from us. So, all right, we will see you all later. And Linda, if you have time, feel free to stay, or if you need to drop off, feel free to do that too. But goodbye, everyone else, and enjoy the weekend.